Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and coach. You're on the Steady Coach. And as part of the ongoing Ask Dr. Yo series of videos, I am happy to bring you another unedited video today to answer a very, very important question that I get asked quite frequently here. And that is, what stops people from recovering from neural circuit dizziness and other symptoms? And the reason this question comes up is so understandable. If you search the internet for your symptoms or your specific diagnosis, or you go on so-called support groups, all you hear are horror stories of people who've had it forever and never get better, and in fact, just keep getting worse. And then you come on my channel and you're like, things are very different over here. Suddenly there are success stories and there's a comment section and people are making progress. Like, what's up with that? What's the difference between the people in the comment section and the success stories and the people that I was exposed to on various social media sites? I'm here to give you 11 reasons why people have trouble recovering. So we're going to go into all of those 11 reasons. And my hope is that this video will be a source of reassurance and also will help you figure out what you might need to focus on in your recovery rather than being a source of doubt and anxiety. But we will be talking about that a little bit more later in this video. Now, before I get into this, if you're new to my channel, welcome. Please hit the subscribe button so I can let you know when I release new content. But also, I've used the term neural circuit dizziness. This refers to PPPD, MDDS, vestibular migraine, other forms of chronic dizziness that are medically unexplained. Basics video also in the video description. This video, though, really applies just as much to non-dizziness related symptoms that are also neural circuit problems relating to nervous system sensitivity. So this includes really bothersome tinnitus. It includes hyperacusis or sound sensitivity. It includes pain and many other symptoms. Now, in this video, you're going to hear me not say a few things that determine whether someone can recover or not. And you're going to hear me say some other things that may be a bit controversial. So let me cover those first, and then we're going to go into the 11 reasons. So in this video, notably, length of time that you have had your symptoms is not what stops people from recovering. From my perspective, your day one is the day that you realize you have neural circuit dizziness. And I have seen this so much. In fact, just today in the coaching group, there is a wonderful participant who's had it for 10 years. And she just realized that she has a neural circuit dizziness problem about 3 months ago. So her recovery only really started 3 months ago, even though she's had it for 10 years, and she's already making progress. So the length of time that you've had symptoms is not what stops people from recovering. Also, the intensity of your symptoms is not what stops people from recovering. I've seen people go from being completely bedridden, I'm not even exaggerating, to going back to living to completely normal lives. So whether you've had it for a long time or the symptoms are really intense, those are not the things that are going to stop you from recovering. Now, where things are going to get maybe a little controversial in this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the things that stop people from recovering, not ever to imply blame, ever. If you have neural circuit symptoms of any kind, it is never your fault. That being said, recovery from neural circuit symptoms is an inside job. It is your responsibility to do what you need to do to get better. That's just how it works. So I'm bringing these things to your attention to give you some choices about what you can work on, not ever to imply that you should feel blamed or guilty or shamed for having neural circuit symptoms. The other thing that I want to mention before I get started here is that for some of you with obsessive compulsive tendencies or OCD or health anxiety, videos like this can be really tricky to listen to. Because ultimately, while I'm trying to give you a lot of reassurance and a lot of ideas about how you might finagle better progress for yourself or how you might move your recovery forward, if you have a lot of doubts about your ability to recover, all you're going to hear are the what ifs. When I say something like, oh, people who have trouble mastering their fear, that can stop them from recovering, you're going to go, oh no, what if I have trouble mastering my fear? So my point here is, if you are in a point in your recovery where doubts are still really, really high and you don't have skills to work with them yet, and you have tons of fear and tons of anxiety, this really may not be the best video for you to listen to right now. This may be appropriate for you to listen to later on in your recovery when you know what to do with those what ifs and doubts when they show up. In fact, I have a video specifically for this. So, what I would recommend to you if you're dealing with tons of doubts and anxiety, and this isn't the right video for you right now, check out the video description for the video on doubts. That one's really going to help you out more than this one will. Okay, now that I've gotten all that out of the way, let's get into the 11 things that I think stop people from recovering from neural circuit symptoms. And number one on this list, some people don't know neural circuit dizziness or neural circuit symptoms are even a thing. And by default, they then think they can't recover. They think there's something horribly wrong with them. And in fact, they're often told that by medical professionals. So why would they recover? If we're dealing with what is essentially a fear and brain prediction cycle that's being driven by your brain expecting things to go wrong, expecting danger, and you think that things are going wrong and you're in constant danger and your symptoms are never going to get better and you have a terrible neurological condition, that's going to stop you from getting better, right? So my assumption is if you're here watching this video, you probably don't fall into this category, but it's a really large number of people. So when you go into some of these groups, which by the way, I suggest leaving if you're trying to get better, because it's not really helpful to hear all the horror stories. But when you go into those groups, a lot of those people don't even know or didn't know that neural circuit symptoms are even a thing that can be recovered from. The second reason that people are stopped from recovering is closely related to the first one. And that is that some people just simply can't accept that neural circuit dizziness is a thing. And there are multiple reasons why someone might not accept that neural circuit dizziness or other symptoms are a thing. And we don't even need to get into that. But it leads us back to the problem we found ourselves with in number one. If you believe you can't recover, then why would you recover? If you believe you can't recover, your brain is getting a constant signal of danger from inside you that basically just kind of confirms its worst fears and keeps the cycle going indefinitely. So that's going to stop people from recovering. If they think neural circuit dizziness isn't a thing or doesn't apply to them, it's going to stop them from recovering. I do want to mention here, I already said at the beginning we were going to be talking about doubts. Doubts are okay. Just because you have doubts does not mean, oh, I don't believe neural circuit dizziness is a thing. That's not what we're talking about here. You can have doubts and still recover. I'm talking about the people who simply don't accept that neural circuit dizziness is even a thing and don't believe that healing is even possible. You have to believe that healing is possible if you are going to be implementing any of the tools and strategies that we talk about on my channel. You do need to use some of those tools and strategies to get better. So again, if you don't believe it's possible, why would you do any of that? You wouldn't, and that's going to stop you from getting better. Okay, number 3. Some people are unwilling or unable to learn skills for dealing with the fear of symptoms. And again, as I said at the beginning, this is not to imply blame on anyone. Some people are just in difficult positions or just don't have the skills that they need to do this. But again, these symptoms are being driven by a cycle of fear, ultimately. Even when people tell me, by the way, that they're not afraid of symptoms, the brain is still very interested in the symptoms and in the triggers. The brain is still reacting as though those symptoms and triggers are dangerous, even if you're not fully aware of being fearful. That being said, because fear is a part of this, when someone does have actual fear going on, when someone does have a ton of anxiety going on, that person does need to work on reacting differently when fear and anxiety come up. And there are lots of different ways to do this. We talk about this a lot on my channel. If someone doesn't work on these skills, then that's going to stop them from recovering. Okay, so related to number 3. So number 4, the fourth thing that stops people from recovering, some people just simply continue to avoid triggers. For whatever reason, they cannot bring themselves to stop avoiding the triggers. And I'm talking not just about physical triggers, although that's a really big thing. Also, it can sometimes be emotional triggers like thoughts. Certain thoughts can trigger fear and symptoms. When someone continues to avoid triggering things, the brain cannot learn. The brain cannot fix. It cannot create new understandings of things that it's not exposed to. It needs to see that something is kind of not working for it to actually correct its current perception of those things. So when someone is unable to change how they're relating to triggers and is continuing to avoid them, the brain has simply no opportunity to do new learning. It's kind of like if you were trying to learn a new skill, if you were trying to teach your brain, say, oh my gosh, like crocheting, but you decided to do it without actually crocheting. Obviously, you're not going to learn how to crochet without actually crocheting. Your brain is not going to learn how to approach these triggers that are currently triggering you without you actually being around those triggers. Okay. Now, number 5, this is going to be one of the trickiest ones. The fifth thing that stops people from recovering, in my experience and opinion, is that some people have mental health things going on that are pretty significant that they're not addressing. And let me put this up front. I think anxiety and depression, especially when you didn't have them before symptoms, are symptoms. They're part of the neural circuit dizziness or other symptom catalog. So, not to say that these aren't mental health related, but this is not the kind of stuff that I'm talking about for number 5. Although, of course, as I said in the previous couple of examples, people do need to know how to work with anxiety and arguably depression as well, since that can stop you from implementing tools. I'm specifically in number 5 talking about things that aren't necessarily directly related to the neural circuit symptoms. And in my experience, this includes obsessive compulsive disorder and borderline personality. Not to call only these two out, these are just the ones that I've seen the most in my work. But what I've noticed is that people who have OCD or borderline have a need for developing other skills before they can put the tools and strategies in practice that I talk about here on my channel. That's not to say, by the way, that someone with OCD or borderline is going to take extra time to recover or that they can't recover. In fact, I've seen people with OCD recover, have the fastest recoveries on record. I'm not even kidding. Like, we're talking days or weeks. And that's because people with OCD who've previously conquered OCD or previously been treated for OCD have special skill sets that people who don't have OCD or who have never had OCD don't have. So this isn't about OCD or borderline personality, meaning that there's some deficit in you that means you can't recover, or you having had one of these diagnoses means that you're not going to recover quickly. Not at all. It just means that if you've never been treated for these things and you have them, you may not have some of the skills you need to implement things like somatic tracking, graded motor imagery, graded exposure, what have you, some kind of emotional awareness and expression practice. Those are things that you need a baseline for in order to do them. With OCD, it's typically skills at working with thoughts and doubts. And with borderline, it's often skills at working with feelings. And those basic skills need to be there before someone can use the tools that I talk about on my channel. So what can stop people from recovering is if they have these particular conditions and they've never been treated or never developed skills for working with those two things. It means they're not going to be successful in applying the tools that I talk about on my channel, which again, really holds people back from recovering. Okay, so number 6 is related. So the 6th thing that can stop people from recovering is having had prolonged or repeated trauma. And this is not a black and white thing. So again, kind of like what I was saying for number 5, Some people who've had trauma have actually developed skills that other people don't have. And in that case, they actually recover really quickly. But on the other hand, someone who's had a lot of trauma, especially recently before the symptoms, where they just simply haven't had time to develop skills for working with the trauma, their bodies are basically in kind of a state of not being safe. Their brain is constantly predicting danger, unrelated to the symptoms. Even if the symptoms weren't there, their brains would be predicting danger, which means it's extra hard to convince a nervous system that's been traumatized and someone doesn't have skills for working with the trauma that things are actually safe and everything's fine, and brain, you can just ignore the symptoms, no big deal. That's very, very difficult for someone who has some kind of post-traumatic response and who doesn't have skills for working with that kind of what we often call hyperarousal, which essentially just means the nervous system is in kind of a high state, a heightened state. It's very sensitive to danger. Because again, if you're extra sensitive to danger, you're also going to be extra sensitive to triggers and symptoms, and that's going to make recovery much more difficult. So number 7, somewhat related, but I want to put this separately because when people think of trauma, they think of certain things. So the 7th thing that stops people from recovering is the presence of ongoing stressors, and that specifically stressors that relate to how the person treats him or herself. Okay. So when we talk about stress on my channel, often we're thinking, oh, I had this job thing, or I lost my job, or, I had a loss of a family member, or maybe good things. I bought a house or whatever. Often people think of outside stress, and not to say that outside stress doesn't matter. And we're going to talk about that in the next one. But what I'm referring to very specifically is stuff that affects how you relate to yourself. For example, if you are very perfectionistic, very hard on yourself, very competitive, that's going to affect how well you're able to implement tools like, say, again, somatic tracking, where you're just trying to respond neutrally and with lightness and without intensity. It can be very hard to suddenly not be intense when you're intense all the time and you're really hard on yourself. In addition, a lot of these kinds of ways of relating to ourselves, these stressful ways of relating to ourselves and our own experiences, tend to be connected to shame. They tend to create shame, or they tend to be trying to avoid shame. Shame is also a danger signal. So when someone has these kinds of patterns or ways of relating to themselves, that can stop them from recovering because they can't really implement the tools in a way that's kind, compassionate, gives themselves time and space that they need to recover. It's really hard for them to do that. And I also want to say, I use the example of perfectionism, but this also applies to people who have trouble with saying no. This applies to people who are people pleasers, who have trouble setting boundaries. These are also things that, again, create more difficulty with knowing that you're safe because you're not actually doing the things that you need to do to make your environment a safe one. Okay. And if you're wondering, oh, Yoni, what if I have, do I relate to myself poorly? First of all, this may be a doubt, in which case I refer you back to the video that I mentioned at the beginning on doubts. But if you're really not sure and you're like, I don't know, do I relate to myself poorly? One thing that you can look for that I found helpful is resentment. When you notice that there's resentment toward people in your life, that's a pretty good indicator that you are suppressing some of your own needs and feelings. Not necessarily that you're going to need to act differently, although, again, we're going to get to that in a second, but that's a pretty good sign that there's something about the way that you're relating to yourself that's probably not creating a lot of safety. And again, that can stop you from recovering because you can somatic track all you want. If your brain's constantly getting a signal from you that you're not good enough or that, your needs don't matter, then you're constantly getting a danger signal that can keep symptoms going. Okay. So number 8, I mentioned this one already. So this is something else that stops people from recovering. So if you have unaddressed life stressors that must be dealt with and are just not willing to deal with them. So before we were talking about kind of internal stressors, like the way we relate to ourselves, external stressors, it refers to things on the outside that are actually a problem. And I know, by the way, I just want to mention this here for those of you with OCD and health anxiety, this can get obsessive really quickly. Like maybe I do have something I really need to change. But for some people, there really is something on the outside that's a problem. I have seen, for example, people have spouses that are abusive and really want to get better from neural circuit symptoms. And it's so hard for me to say this to them when they're already in a bad situation. But how in the world am I supposed to convince their brains they're safe when they're actually not safe on the outside? So I would, again, treat this with some caution because those of you dealing with high levels of anxiety are going to potentially start looking for all the things on the outside that could be wrong when those things, again, everyone has stress, everyone has problems in relationships, everyone has those normal stressors. That's not going to stop you from recovering. But for some people, there are extreme stressors and outside circumstances that actually do need to change, and your body's not going to believe that you're safe until you actually are safe. Okay. Okay. So now, number 9, some people don't get better because they are unable or unwilling to accept reality as it is right now. So the reality is right now, you have symptoms. Right now, your stress bucket is full. Right now, you may not have the capacity to physically do the things that you did a year ago or a week ago or 6 years ago, whatever it is. That's the reality. And it can be so hard for people to get to the point of accepting that this is where they are for now. And I always have people add that on to the end of that sentence, for now, because it truly is for now. Things will change. But when someone's stuck constantly comparing their current abilities and their current symptoms to where they were before the symptoms started, they can't move forward. And it's it there are so many reasons why this is a problem. So first of all, obviously, when you're busy ruminating about how bad things are compared to how they were, you don't really have the mental capacity to do other stuff. But it also leads you to being endlessly frustrated. And I've spoken about this in previous videos, but frustration is kind of a flip side to fear. So we have the fight or flight response. So fear being the flight response, get away from this scary thing. And fight being the, I'm going to fight this scary thing. So when you're feeling constantly angry at and frustrated with your symptoms and with yourself, that's also kind of a danger signal that actually feeds into this fight or flight response that keeps symptoms going. So being endlessly upset and angry isn't super helpful either. And that often comes from just being unable to accept that this is where you are right now. But deeper than that, when people are in this position and have this particular mindset where they just can't accept where they are right now, they feel victimized. They feel like victims. They feel powerless. And feeling powerless is the absolute opposite of being safe. When you feel like you're powerless, then first of all, you don't feel very motivated to do the things you need to do to get better, but you also are full of doubts. You feel like they're not going to work. And it's the things that you actually do end up doing are going to be less effective because you don't necessarily believe deep inside that they're actually going to help you. So for so many reasons, it's really important for people to be able to accept whatever the circumstances are right now, one day at a time, one moment at a time. For now, this is where things are right now. Okay. So before I move on to 10, I just want to say one more thing. This is also an area where people with OCD will get stuck sometimes. So I think that a lot of times people with OCD and health anxiety will say things like, am I being accepting enough? Maybe I'm not accepting enough. So if you're feeling that kind of doubt right now, just recognize that's a doubt. This is a spectrum, right? So I'm not referring to, I have to have complete and total utter acceptance in every moment that these symptoms are happening and I can never feel frustrated and I always need to be super neutral. That's not what I'm saying. This is a spectrum. in general, we want to be a little bit more in acceptance, or at least practicing acceptance of where we are right now, knowing that sometimes these things are going to kick your butt and you're going to feel terrible and you're going to hate them and you're going to be frustrated and you're going to be fighting them and trying to get rid of them. That is totally normal. That doesn't mean you're not being accepting. I'm referring to people who simply are just stuck in anger and frustration and avoidance all the time. And I have seen that. Okay, moving on to number 10. This is probably going to be the most difficult one for me to talk about, because this is the one that could be interpreted as me being blamey. And I truly do not mean to blame anyone. This is just something, though, that I've seen, and it's important for all of you to know about. And I'm sure you've recognized this and seen this in some of those support groups. The 10th reason why people can get stuck and what stops people from recovering is that some people have a reason to be sick. And I'm only saying this because I've seen it happen, but I don't judge people for it. That being said, what happens sometimes is that, first of all, people can build an identity around having a condition. And that's one of the reasons I talk in my videos about not doing that. I don't make it a noun, make it a for now adjective. So I'm dizzy right now. I'm not a dizzy person. Okay. That kind of thing. But when someone has an identity built around a particular diagnosis, and even sometimes for such noble reasons, trying to be an advocate, trying to help other people, it becomes part of their identity. And then when someone like me comes along and says, this is something people can get better from, it's threatening their identity. It's actually insulting. And not only is it insulting, it opens up the possibility that some of the grief and suffering that this person has endured could have been avoided. And that can be extremely difficult to face. So difficult to face. I've just seen this. People would just rather not. They would rather just continue the way that they've been doing, just believing what they believe now, versus accepting that some of this might have been avoidable and needing to deal with the horrible, horrible grief and possibly shame and guilt that come out of that. And along those same lines, sometimes the things that are keeping people dizzy are things that are just really, really difficult life circumstances, very difficult choices, difficult lifelong patterns. And sometimes the brain's like, you know what? Not doing that. Nope, we're just not in a position to do that right now. So the brain prefers to be sick. And then the person prefers to just, be in this identity of being a sick person. Again, I say this with so much love and complete lack of judgment, but I would hope that people who are here on my channel want to know this, because you want to get better. If you want to get better, then you need to be aware that this can stop people from getting better if they wrap their identity around having this particular condition. And number 11, I said number 10 was the most controversial. So 11's easy. The 11th thing that stops people from getting better, and this is maybe a little out there for some of you, but I think some people are going through a spiritual or existential crisis. And that's part of why they're dealing with a neural circuit problem. And some people are simply not willing to face that. It's easier to focus the attention on symptoms and deal with a lot of physical symptoms than to undergo a radical personal change or go through a spiritual process. And that is all I'm going to say about that here. I am by no means a spiritual teacher of any kind. This is just all the things that I mentioned in this video, all 11 of them are things I've learned from my clients. So I'm sharing my observations with you to do with them what you will. Okay. So yeah, I think that covers it. My 11 reasons why some people don't recover, things that stop people from recovering. And I hope, again, what you got from this video was some ideas of the things that you might need to work on for your recovery. And I really look forward to hearing from you in the questions and comment section below. Again, I just hope this was useful information and that people understand I'm not in any way trying to put blame on anyone for having symptoms. All right, guys. Of course, questions and comments in the comment section below if you're watching on YouTube. Like the video if you're watching on YouTube. Share it with friends if you found it useful. Subscribe to my channel. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, you can also follow the podcast and leave me a 5-star rating if you think I deserve it. All of the things I just mentioned help me reach more people. This is actually the reason I do what I do, so that I can help as many people as possible for free or at low cost. So no one has to suffer as long as you have, however long that's been. It's been too long. I don't care if it's been 2 days or 2 years. So I would really appreciate your help with those things. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again next time. Take care, everyone.